I was 61 years old the morning the courthouse room laughed at me. The clerk had just stamped a red word across a county tax card. Sold. That was how I bought 140 acres of ground nobody in Rawlins County wanted anymore. Not for $17 an acre, not for $17 down. $17 total, less than a worn saddle, less than 2 sacks of flour and a new pair of boots. Folks called it the ash place because nothing green had held there since the dry years began. Wheat had been dragged off it until the topsoil went thin as stove ash. The last tenant had left in the night with 2 mules, a cook stove, and a note nailed to the door that said the farm had beaten him. The bank tried to sell it. The county tried to give it back to the tax rolls. Nobody touched it. Then I raised my hand. The auctioneer looked over his spectacles and said, "Mr. Alden, you understand what you're buying?" I said, "I understand what everybody else is seeing." That was the truth. Everybody else saw a dead farm. I saw a farm holding its breath. I drove out there that afternoon in my old International truck, the deed folded inside my coat pocket like a fever. March winds scraped dust across the road and packed it into the cracks of my hands. The fence along the west side had fallen in 3 places. The wind pump leaned so badly it looked ashamed to be standing. A line of dead sunflowers rattled near the barn wall. I walked past the broken gate and knelt in the field. The soil did not crumble, it spilled. Pale, loose, bitter-smelling when I rubbed it between my fingers. But 6 inches down, under the ash-colored crust, there was still a darker band. Not much, just a thin line of old life hiding where the plow had not reached it. I sat on my heels and laughed once, not because it was funny, because that was the first good news anybody had told me in 2 years. My wife, Sarah, had been gone since the previous September. My oldest boy was laying rail outside Wichita. My youngest had taken a job at a packing house in Kansas City. I did not blame them. A man with children learns not to curse a paycheck. But I was not built for rooms, clocks, or factory whistles. I needed weather over me. I needed something difficult enough to outlast grief. So I stood in that ruined field with dust crawling around my boots, and I told the place, "All right, we'll start where you can still breathe." That night, I pulled my father's field ledger from the cedar trunk under my bed. It was wrapped in oilcloth and tied with binder twine. On the first page, in his cramped hand, he had written, "A farm goes poor the same way a man does, slowly, then all at once. Bring it back the same way, slowly, then all at once." I read until the lamp smoked. My father had never owned much, but he had watched soil the way other men watched money. He wrote down where frost settled, where water lingered, where rye broke crust better than oats, where sweet clover sank a root when nothing else would. He had drawn fields like maps of a sick body. The high knoll needed cover before cash. The west flat needed manure before corn. The draw needed water slowed, not drained away. The north slope needed rest, even if a banker called rest laziness. By midnight, I had stopped thinking of the ash place as one farm. It was 4 different wounds, and each one needed a different kind of patience. The first spring, I did not plant for a harvest. That made people nervous. Men are comfortable watching another man gamble if the gamble looks familiar. Corn, wheat, debt, prayer, repeat. But I was not trying to win a crop that year. I was trying to keep the farm from exhaling the last of itself. I took the west flat first. 12 acres closest to the road, hard enough to wring under a shovel. I plowed it shallow, barely 4 inches, just enough to break the seal without turning the dead top deep into the living band. Then I broadcast winter rye with sweet clover so thick that the seed looked wasted. Old Ben Taggart stopped his wagon by the road and shouted, "Alden, you feedin' birds now?" I waved like he had offered advice. By late April, a faint green haze appeared across that flat. Not a crop, not even a promise. A breath. I stood at the fence every morning and watched it spread. On the east knoll I planted cowpeas once the ground warmed. On the lower draw I hauled manure from the livery stable in town, load after load, until the smell followed my truck like a second engine. I patched the barn roof with tin I bought from a collapsed chicken house. I cut Russian thistle by hand before it could seed. Every evening, my shirt was stiff with sweat and dust. Every morning, the farm looked almost the same. That was the hardest part. Not the work, the waiting. By June, the jokes had sharpened. One man asked if I planned to grow clover and sell it to grasshoppers. Another said I ought to charge admission because folks had never seen a man bury money so carefully. Even the banker in Atwood tried to be kind when he said, "Nathan, you're too old to start losing land now." I told him, "I already bought the losing part. I'm working on the land." Then July came dry. Not ordinary dry, mean dry. Wind walked the county every afternoon. It found every bare field and lifted it. Some days the sun rose copper and stayed that way. You could taste Nebraska in your teeth by breakfast. On July 17th, a black duster came out of the northwest. I saw it while I was fixing fence along the draw. A wall of dirt, tall enough to cover the sky, rolling toward the farm like judgment. I ran for the barn, but halfway there I stopped and looked back at the west flat. The rye and clover were not tall, but they were rooted. The storm hit so hard it shoved grit through the barn boards. The roof groaned. A loose sheet of tin tore free and disappeared into the dark. Inside, my horse kicked the stall until I got my hand on her neck. For 20 minutes, the world was only noise. Then it passed. I stepped outside with dust in my ears and blood on my knuckles. The neighbor's wheat field across the road had moved. You could see it in drifts against my fence. But my west flat was still there, scarred, flattened in streaks, bent low like a man taking punishment. Still there. I walked out and pushed my fingers into the soil beneath the rye. It held. That was the first time I knew the farm had decided to live. In the fall, I turned the rye under while it was still green. Not deep, never deep. My father's ledger said tired ground must be fed where it can reach the food. I seeded the flat again before frost and left the knoll in cowpea vines until they blackened. That winter, I did more reading than sleeping. There was a page in the back of the ledger I had missed before, folded once and tucked between notes on rainfall. It was a sketch of a seep line. My father had drawn it from a farm he worked as a young man near the Solomon River. Beside it, he wrote, "When a field keeps failing low, don't ask how to dry it. Ask what water is trying to build." I thought about the draw at the ash place. 3 acres of cattails and cracked mud. Everybody had plowed around it. Everybody had cursed it. The old tenant had even dug a straight ditch to drain it, but the ditch had filled with silt and thistle. In February, I went out with a spade. The ground was frozen on top, but near the south bank, I found water moving under a skin of ice. Clear water, cold enough to ache. It came from a small seam below the knoll and vanished into the weeds. I stood there with my breath smoking in front of me. For a year, I had thought that draw was the farm's worst place. It was the farm's heart. I spent 6 weeks reshaping it by hand and mule. I did not make anything grand, just a shallow basin with a curved berm, a feeder cut from the seep, and grass left thick along the edges. When spring rains came, the basin filled and stayed filled. By May, frogs found it. By June, red-winged blackbirds hung from the cattails. By August, the air around that pond felt cooler than the rest of the farm, and the clover below it stayed green 2 weeks longer than anything else in the county. People stopped laughing after that. They did not praise me yet. Pride takes longer to heal than dirt. But their trucks slowed on the road. They leaned out windows. They asked what seed I used, how shallow I plowed, where I got the manure, why my cover crop had held when theirs had blown. I answered all of it. No secrets. Secrets do not grow food. The second spring, I planted oats on the West Flat. Not because oats would make me rich, because oats would tell the truth quickly. They came up even, clean, blue-green at the base the way healthy oats should be. I walked those rows every dawn, looking for thin spots, rust, weakness, anything that said the first year had been a fluke. But the stand held. On the east knoll, I planted corn only on the lower half and left the crown in grass. A younger man might have pushed the whole slope. I had already seen what greed did to a hillside. Letting the crown rest felt like leaving money in a drawer. But by then, I understood something I had not understood at 40. Some money must stay in the ground. In July, the oats stood waist-high. Ben Taggart stopped again. This time, he climbed down from his wagon and walked into the field without asking. He bent a head of oats between his fingers, rolled it, and blew the chaff from his palm. Then he looked at me. "What'd you put on this?" "Time," I said. He snorted. "Time don't come in sacks." "No," I said. "That's why men waste everything else first." He did not smile, but he did not argue. When I cut that field, it yielded 38 bushels an acre. 38. On land the county had sold for $17 because no one would pay the back tax. I sold half, kept half for seed, and put the first money from the ash place in a coffee tin behind the stove. I did not count it for a week. I just liked knowing the farm had paid back something besides hope. The next year, the corn came. Not a miracle crop. I never trusted miracles that needed a measuring stick. But the stalks were thick, the leaves held color through heat, the ears filled to the tip on the rows below the pond. I remember breaking one open in late August and pressing a kernel with my thumbnail. Milk beat it out, white and clean. I held that ear and thought of my father's line, slowly, then all at once. By harvest, the lower corn made 44 bushels an acre. The oats beat the year before. The cowpeas left the knoll darker than I had found it. The pond watered my team through a dry spell that made 2 neighbors haul barrels from town. The county agent came in September with a notebook and a face that tried not to look surprised. He dug 3 holes, took roots in his hands, asked where I bought fertilizer. I pointed to the ledger under my arm. "From a dead man," I said. He did not know whether to laugh, so he wrote it down. 2 weeks later, a short piece ran in the Atwood paper. "Abandoned farm shows return under old rotation methods." They spelled my name wrong. I cut it out anyway. After that, men came by on purpose. Some came humble, some came proud. Most came with the same look I had carried into that field the first day. Tired eyes and one small place inside them not ready to quit. They asked about rye, about clover, about whether manure was worth the hauling, about how long to rest a slope when a payment was due. I told them the truth. The land does not care what you owe, it only answers what you do. By 1939, I had nearly all 140 acres working, resting, or healing. Not every acre produced every year, that was the point. The farm became a rotation of effort. Grain here, clover there. pasture where hooves could help instead of harm, grass strips along the wind, pond water held like savings, compost returned like thanks. The ash place stopped looking like one wounded field. It started looking like a living system. In 1942, I bought 80 acres adjoining the north line from a widow named Mrs. Larkin. She had been offered less by men who knew she needed cash. I paid her fair and left the cottonwood standing in the creek bottom. She cried when I handed her the envelope, and I pretended not to notice, because dignity is sometimes the last property a person has. During the war, I grew what the government asked for, but I would not strip the soil to do it. Corn followed clover, wheat followed peas. Pasture rested, manure went back. Men said the war made shortcuts necessary. I had lived long enough to know shortcuts send the bill to your children. When the boys came home in 1945, some of them came to me for work. They were younger than my sons and older than their years. I hired 3. I taught them how to judge soil by smell after rain, how to leave residue when the wind was hungry, how to sharpen a plow but not worship it. One of them, a quiet boy named Ellis, asked me once why I had bought the ash place when everyone warned me off. I told him, because warnings are usually about the last man's failure, not the next man's work. I am 82 now. My hands have knots where straight fingers used to be. I do not walk the whole farm anymore. My son Daniel runs most of it with his daughter, and she keeps records sharper than mine ever were. She has a college word for nearly everything my father knew by watching: soil structure, biology, water retention, regenerative rotation. I am glad she has the words, but the farm knew the truth before any of us named it. That pond is still there below the knoll. Cottonwoods shade the north line. The west flat that men mocked now grows oats so clean buyers ask for them by name. The field that once spilled through my fingers holds together in dark crumbs after rain. Sometimes people still ask how I turned a $17 mistake into a farm that fed 3 generations. They expect a trick, a secret amendment, a lucky rain, a seed variety no one else could get. I tell them what happened. I bought ground everyone called finished. I listened closer than they had. I gave it cover when it was bare, food when it was hungry, water when it was trying to gather, and rest when every frightened man would have forced one more crop out of it. I did not bring the farm back by beating it. I brought it back by letting it breathe. And if there is a piece of your life people have already named dead, be careful before you believe them. Some things are not dead. Some things are waiting for the first person patient enough to stop taking from them and start giving them air.